All right, so buckle up, because today we're taking a deep dive into ancient Greece,
A civilization that still has a surprising impact on us even today.
even though it feels like it was, like, forever ago.
Exactly. And you don't need to be an expert or anything. Consider this your crash course.
Yeah, we're starting from scratch.
Perfect. We're going to be looking at this document called Documento7.pdf.
Catchy title.
Right. But the subtitle is actually really interesting. Grecia, cuna de la civilización occidental y contribuciones a la humanidad.
So basically, Greece, cradle of Western civilization and contributions to humanity.
Yep, that's the one. So we're going to try to figure out why ancient Greece is considered like the foundation of Western civilization.
And how it still matters to us today.
It's pretty amazing how much we take for granted that actually came from ancient Greece.
Like what?
Well, think about it. Democracy, scientific inquiry, theater. I mean, these are cornerstones of our modern world.
And they all have roots back in ancient Greece.
It's pretty mind-blowing when you think about it.
I mean, it sounds a bit much, this whole cradle of Western civilization thing.
It does sound a bit dramatic.
What makes ancient Greece so special? Like, why them?
Their influence on culture and knowledge globally is truly enduring.
Okay, so where do we even begin?
Well, I think a good place to start is with their philosophical contributions.
Oh yeah, philosophy. Ancient Greece had some pretty big names in that department.
Some of the most influential thinkers in history.
Yeah, like Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle.
Exactly. Their ideas laid the groundwork for how we think and approach the world, even today.
I mean, I've definitely heard of those guys, even if I don't know much about them.
Well, let's start with Socrates. He was all about challenging conventional wisdom and emphasizing ethics.
He was one always asking questions, right?
Exactly. Imagine someone constantly pushing you to examine your beliefs.
And justify your actions.
That was Socrates in a nutshell.
Wasn't there a famous quote about that? Something about the unexamined life?
You got it. The unexamined life is not worth living.
That's the one.
And then you have Plato, his student, who took those ideas even further.
Plato. He founded the academy in Athens, right?
That's right. Considered the first university. And he wrote some really thought-provoking stuff like The Republic.
Which was all about...
Ideal forms of government and justice, trying to create the perfect society.
So Socrates was all about questioning everything, and Plato was trying to build utopia.
Pretty much.
What about Aristotle? Didn't he come after Plato?
Yep. And he was all about logic and reason.
I vaguely remember learning about that in school.
Aristotle was a total polymath, excelled in logic, ethics, politics, you name it.
Wow, a real Renaissance man before the Renaissance.
Exactly. He even tutored Alexander the Great.
No way.
Yep. And his work on logic, it's still used today?
So these weren't just like armchair philosophers, though.
Not at all. Their ideas had real-world implications.
So ancient Greece gave us philosophy that shapes how we think even now. But wait, Documento7.pdf also mentioned something about democracy starting there.
Right, and that's a big one.
I mean, that seems pretty important.
You're telling me Athens, back in the 5th century BC, they implemented direct democracy.
Direct democracy. So, like, everyone got a vote on everything.
Pretty much. Citizens directly participated in government decisions.
Wow, that must have been crazy. Town hall meetings would have been intense.
I can only imagine. It was definitely revolutionary for its time.
And obviously different from how we do democracy now.
Right, but the core principle, citizen participation, that's something we inherited from them.
So next time I'm grumbling about going to vote, I should thank the ancient Greeks.
Exactly. It's a privilege hard-won over centuries.
Speaking of things we take for granted, this document also mentions some pretty impressive scientific and technological advancements.
Oh yeah, ancient Greece wasn't all just philosophy and politics.
They're busy.
Take Pythagoras, for example.
Pythagoras, the triangle guy.
That's the one. A squared plus b squared equals c squared.
Yeah, that's still a thing.
Absolutely. It's still fundamental to mathematics and engineering.
And then there's Euclid.
Ah, Euclid. His Elements is like the geometry Bible.
Didn't they make us read that in high school?
Probably. It lays out principles that are still used today.
Okay, so those are the math guys. What about Archimedes? Didn't he figure out levers?
Levers and buoyancy.
Right, buoyancy. Wasn't there a story about him running naked through the streets shouting, Eureka?
Yeah. He supposedly figured it out while taking a bath.
Classic Archimedes.
It just shows you how these ancient discoveries were both practical and totally groundbreaking.
And they weren't just good at math and engineering.
Nope. Their contributions to astronomy were equally impressive.
Like what?
Well, there's Hipparchus, for example.
What did he do?
He created an early star catalog and developed trigonometry.
Trigonometry. Remind me what that is again.
Think of it as the math of triangles.
Ah, right. Triangles and circles.
Exactly. Hipparchus used it to map the stars and figure out their movements.
So basically, he was an ancient astronomer.
Pretty much. And get this, there was another guy, Aristarchus, who proposed the Earth revolves around the sun.
Wait, are you serious? Before Copernicus?
Way before. Over 1,800 years earlier.
That's incredible.
They were way ahead of their time in so many ways.
It's pretty humbling when you think about what they accomplished with, limited technology.
It makes you wonder what they would have achieved with our modern tools.
All right, so we've covered philosophy, democracy, and science.
We're just getting started. We haven't even touched on their art and architecture yet.
Oh, right. Ancient Greece was famous for that stuff. Think of the Parthenon.
Exactly. With those majestic Doric columns.
I've seen pictures. It's pretty impressive.
And it's not just the Parthenon. They had a whole architectural vocabulary.
Like what?
Well, they developed 3 main orders: Doric, Ionic, and Corinthian.
I think I remember learning about that in art history.
Each one has its own distinctive features. Doric is the simplest. Ionic has scroll-like decorations at the top.
And Corinthian is the fancy one.
Exactly, with all the ornate floral designs.
So they had their own architectural style guide.
You could say that. They established a standard of beauty and grandeur that influenced Western architecture for centuries.
I mean, you can still see those influences today.
Absolutely. And then there's sculpture.
Oh yeah, the Greeks were obsessed with the human form.
Absolutely. They wanted to capture the ideal human form.
And they were pretty good at it.
They were masters of their craft.
But for me, one of the most exciting things about ancient Greece is the birth of theater.
Ah, yes. Theater. It all started there.
I've heard of playwrights like Sophocles and Euripides, but I'll admit I've never actually read any of their plays.
Well, their tragedies and comedies explored themes that are still relevant today. Fate, justice, love, loss.
It's amazing how stories from thousands of years ago can still resonate with us.
It's like they tapped into something universal about human nature.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground already. Philosophy, democracy, science, and art.
And we've only just scratched the surface. There's so much more to explore.
Like what?
Well, this document mentions something called the polis.
The polis, what's that?
Think of it as an independent city-state, like Athens or Sparta.
So ancient Greece wasn't one big unified country.
Not exactly. They had these individual city-states, each with its own government and laws.
But they were all still Greek, right?
Right. They shared a common culture and language, but they were fiercely independent.
Interesting. So what else is there?
Well, they also laid the groundwork for international law and treaties.
Really? That seems pretty advanced for their time.
They understood the need for rules and agreements between different city-states.
To keep the peace.
Exactly. And to promote trade. They were like early diplomats.
And let's not forget their economic innovations.
Oh, yeah, they were pioneers in that area, too.
Like what?
Well, they were among the first to use metal coins.
For trade.
Right, which made everything much easier. And they were masters of maritime trade.
Maritime trade, so they were sailing all over the Mediterranean.
Exactly, connecting different cultures and spreading their ideas.
Wow, it's incredible how much they accomplished.
It really is.
I have to admit, it's a lot to take in. This document is packed with information.
It's a deep dive, after all.
So we've established that ancient Greece was a pretty big deal. But I'm still wondering, why should we care about it today? It all happened so long ago.
That's a great question, and it's one we'll be exploring in the next part of our deep dive.
Stay tuned, folks. We'll be right back. Actually, no need for a break. We're diving right back in. Okay, so we just spent like the last half hour talking about all the amazing things that came out of ancient Greece.
Their philosophy, the early democracy, the science, the art, the architecture.
I mean, it's clear they were innovators, real thinkers.
They definitely left their mark on history.
But how does any of that connect to us today? I mean, it was like thousands of years ago.
That's the question, isn't it? What's the relevance of ancient Greece in the 21st century?
Exactly. Why should we care?
Well, I think a good place to start is with one of their most significant contributions, democracy.
Oh, right. We talked about how the Athenians were experimenting with direct democracy.
Where citizens directly participated in government decisions.
Which, I mean, it had its issues, right? It eventually failed.
It did, but it also planted the seeds for representative democracy.
The kind of democracy we see in a lot of countries today.
Exactly.
So when we vote for our representatives, we're kind of building on those foundations.
The foundations laid by those ancient Athenians.
It's kind of mind-blowing when you think about it.
It really is. And it's not just democracy.
What else?
Their contributions to science are still impacting our lives today.
Like in practical ways.
Think about the Pythagorean theorem, still used in math and engineering.
Oh, right. A
Yeah.
squared plus b squared equals c squared.
And then there's Euclidean geometry.
Shapes and stuff.
Exactly. Those principles are used in architecture, construction, even computer graphics and navigation.
Wow, so even if we don't realize it, we're using ancient Greek knowledge every day.
Pretty much.
What about their art and literature? Do we still see their influence there?
Absolutely. Look at our architecture. A lot of government buildings, museums, even some modern homes incorporate elements of classical Greek design.
Like those columns we talked about.
Doric, Ionic, Corinthian, they're everywhere.
So they're not just ancient relics,
Not at all. And then you have theater.
which also started in ancient Greece.
Right. It's the foundation of Western drama.
And we're still telling stories about the same things they were. Love, loss, betrayal, revenge.
Exactly. Those themes are timeless.
It's pretty cool that they figured that out so long ago.
They understood human nature.
What about philosophy? Does any of that ancient wisdom still hold up?
I'd say so. Socrates, with his emphasis on self-reflection and critical thinking.
Question everything, right?
That's the one. In this age of information overload, I think that's more important than ever.
Yeah, we're constantly bombarded with information.
It's easy to just accept things without really thinking about them.
So Socrates is like our guide to navigating the internet.
You could say that. He reminds us to question our assumptions, look for evidence, and be open to different viewpoints.
Be skeptical.
Exactly. And then you have Aristotle and his work on ethics and virtue.
Ethics, like what's right and wrong.
That's right. His ideas about balance, moderation, developing good character, they still inform ethical debates today.
In fields like medicine and law.
And business.
It's crazy how they were wrestling with these big questions thousands of years ago.
And those questions are still relevant today. What is a good life? How should we treat each other?
What are our responsibilities?
Exactly. Their insights are timeless.
So it's not just about admiring them from afar.
It's about recognizing how their legacy lives on in us
And maybe learning from them.
and using their wisdom to navigate our own complex world.
Makes sense. I mean, in a way, we're all inheritors of that intellectual and cultural legacy.
Absolutely. But it's also important to remember that ancient Greece wasn't perfect.
Oh, right. They had slavery, and women didn't really have a voice.
Their democracy, although groundbreaking, was limited to a small portion of the population.
So we have to look at them with a critical eye.
Acknowledge both the good and the bad.
So what are some key takeaways from all this? What can we learn from their successes and failures?
Well, one thing that stands out to me is the fragility of democracy.
What do you mean?
Athens shows us that even a well-established democracy can be vulnerable
To internal divisions.
and external pressures.
So it's not something we can just take for granted.
Exactly. Democracy requires active participation, informed citizens, and a commitment to its principles.
It's like a constant work in progress.
That's a good way to put it.
So we have democracy, science, art, philosophy. Anything else this document highlights as a takeaway from ancient Greece?
Oh, there's one more thing I wanted to mention. The concept of R8.
R8. What's that?
It's a Greek word that basically means excellence.
Like being the best
It's about striving to be the best version of yourself,
in everything you do.
whether it's athletics, intellectual pursuits, or moral character.
So it's about more than just success.
It's about reaching your full potential.
I can see how that would appeal to the ancient Greeks.
They were high achievers,
And it's a message that still resonates today.
set high standards, pursue your passions, make a positive contribution to the world.
Leave things better than you found them.
Exactly.
Pretty inspiring, actually.
It's a good note to end on as we wrap up this part of our deep dive into ancient Greece.
So we've explored their achievements, their legacy, and the lessons they offer for our own lives.
And in the final part of our deep dive, we'll delve even deeper into this document.
Uncovering some lesser-known facts about ancient Greece.
The stuff they don't teach you in school.
I can't wait. Let's do it. All right, so we're back, and we've been on this incredible journey through ancient Greece.
From philosophy to democracy to, like, the birth of theater and the Olympics.
It's amazing how much they accomplished.
It really is.
But this Documento 7.pdf keeps saying there's more.
You know, it's funny. We often focus on the big achievements.
So like headline stuff.
Exactly. But sometimes it's those smaller details that really bring history to life.
Okay, so what kind of hidden gems are we talking about here?
Well, one thing that stood out to me was the importance of hospitality in ancient Greek culture.
Hospitality. like being nice to guests.
It goes deeper than that. They had this concept called xenia.
Xenia,
Yeah, it basically emphasized the duty of welcoming strangers.
like anyone who showed up.
Pretty much offering them food, shelter, protection.
So it wasn't just good manners, it was like a moral obligation
Exactly. They believed it honored the gods.
and kept things running smoothly.
Right. Violations of xenia were considered serious offenses.
Like you could get in trouble with the gods.
You could.
Wow, that's intense. It makes you think, you know? Maybe we could use a little more Xenia in the world today.
A little more welcoming, a little more kindness towards strangers.
I think that's a great takeaway.
It's a reminder that we're all connected, even across cultures.
So what else does this document tell us about everyday life back then?
Well, another thing they really emphasized was physical fitness.
Makes sense. They were the ones who started the Olympics, right?
Exactly. Athletic competitions weren't just for fun.
They were a big deal.
They were a way to honor the gods, demonstrate strength, discipline.
The ideal of a sound mind and a sound body.
That's the one.
And the Olympics, that all started way back in 776 BC.
In a city called Olympia.
So people have been competing for, like, almost 3,000 years.
It's pretty amazing when you think about it.
It's this ancient tradition that's still going strong.
Bringing people together from all over the world.
Speaking of going places, I noticed Documento7.pdf mentioned the ancient Greeks were pretty skilled sailors.
Oh yeah, they were explorers, driven by trade and curiosity.
So they weren't just hanging out in Greece.
Not at all. They were sailing all over the Mediterranean, establishing colonies, trading posts.
Wow, so their influence spread far and wide.
They connected with different cultures, brought back new ideas.
It's like they were global citizens way back then.
In a way, they were.
So this Documento7.pdf has really given us this multifaceted view of ancient Greece.
Not just the big picture, but the everyday details, too.
It's like we've gotten to know them a little bit.
And I think that's what makes history so fascinating.
Yeah, it's not just dates and names, it's about real people.
Living their lives, facing challenges, creating amazing things.
And sometimes those things, those ideas, they echo through time.
Like ripples in a pond.
And they reach us, even thousands of years later.
It's pretty incredible, right?
It really is. Well, I want to thank you for taking us on this deep dive into ancient Greece.
It's been my pleasure.
I feel like I've learned so much.
And remember, the exploration doesn't have to end here.
Yeah, there's so much more to discover.
If you're interested, there are tons of books, documentaries, museums.
Endless possibilities.
So keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep learning from the past.
Because as we've seen, sometimes the past has a lot to teach us about the present.
And maybe even the future.
Well said. Thanks again for joining us on this deep dive. And until next time, keep exploring.